Welcome to the Wolf and Bull podcast. I am the Wolf, your friendly neighborhood host in the weird Arizona neighborhood. And then across from me, I have my very wise, intelligent co-host, the Bull. He sounds like demonic monster.
I don't know why I'm going back and forth like this, but
yeah, well, it's good. That was
felt
good.
like
that was very
needed
good.
to do that.
I like that a lot. And then we also, again, back in the studio, once again, we have Beowulf, our Irish Gaelic princess, queen, I guess, actually, queen of the...
That's me.
Yeah, queen.
The
Queen of
Gaelic
castle.
queen.
Yep.
Interesting.
And that was the butchered intro. We have not been in the studio together in like 3 weeks, 2 weeks,
All together?
All together?
I don't think it's
been like 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
It's been like 2 weeks.
So the weeks are
A
melding
lifetime.
together.
You were gone, and you were with me.
We had to hold the fort.
Yeah.
Did you?
Might have been pitiful. I don't know. Might have been
Did you
great.
hold the Gaelic fort?
Ha ha ha. Was that what they were called? Forts? I thought they were just called castles.
Well, they were called castles after they were first like mounds of earth with like you know how when we were a kid, of course you guys didn't have any idea. Growing up on a farm, I would build forts. And when I was really young, it would start with like there's a big mud puddle in between everything, and you'd form a wall like a levee around the giant puddle, and you'd pile up like
This doesn't
army dudes
surprise
and
me
stuff
about
like
you
that.
at all.
You know, you're
By
just
the time
describing...
by the time you got older, you'd have like, well, then you graduated to the Lincoln log stage. First it was sticks and stuff like that, and then Lincoln logs, then blocks and bricks and stones. And then sooner or later, you had an underground fort, a ladder up a tree.
You're like Ben from It.
You know, you're just describing like third world poverty, right?
What are you talking about?
Oh, wow.
It was awesome.
I'm just saying.
It was awesome.
Wow.
Like, first you start out in a puddle of mud, and,
right.
and then you move up to building with sticks, and eventually you have a little shack.
Hey, you should have seen us in the winter. We had
I
ice
lived there.
wars.
I lived
ice
there.
wars. It was
Yeah.
like Game of Thrones
We did
all
too.
over again.
Speaking of Game
The
of
big wall.
Thrones, we just watched the first 3 episodes of the, what is it called? The House of Dragon.
House of Dragon.
Oh, I actually really like
Dragon
it.
House.
Really?
I was a little worried, I'll admit. I was concerned that it wouldn't be my cup of tea. But I love it. And it makes me want to go back and try and watch all the other seasons.
No.
But I don't know if I'm up for
I
that
thought you
quite
watched
yet.
the whole thing before.
I did, but you know, there's a difference between watching them like over time, because that was when they were actually coming out like once a
You
week.
just want to binge them, kind of like
Yeah, but that's such a commitment.
Love Continent or whatever it was.
Oh my god!
We got through 1 season of that, and now
Stop.
it's too much.
I'm going through PTSD. It's not worth bringing up anymore. I went through that one season for you.
Thank
for
you.
you.
And for the
For you.
audience.
He was on there after you go to bed. He's on.
Welcome to Love Island. Like
It was like being a kid eating a whole thing of Oreos, and it was like so great at the moment. Then afterwards, you're like, oh,
It wasn't Oreos.
I don't think I can eat Oreos
No.
again. That's what it was watching in the full season of
Nothing
Love Island
compares
in,
to
like,
Oreos.
4 days.
Nothing compares to Oreos. And the fact that you're comparing Love Island to Oreos is almost insulting.
Tastes great,
double
not great
stuff.
for you.
Oh my god.
Oh
those
my God,
and then
double
what are those oatmeal cake things?
Oh, Little Debbie's
Oh
oatmeal.
my god,
Oatmeal
those
cookies
things
or
I
whatever they're called.
would murder for those. They're not oatmeal, little oatmeals or something, but they're like the little wafer.
Yeah, I know what
things.
you're talking about.
And they've got like cream,
Oh, the little,
like the discs things.
yeah, the little
discs.
Neapolitan ones.
No, you had them at your house.
Yeah,
Just
those
the-
are Little Debbie's oatmeal. Cakes
Oatmeal
or something
surprises.
Like that. I don't
The
know.
oatmeal surprises. Yeah, well, welcome to the Wolf and Bull podcast. That's what we talk about in the first 2 seconds. How is everyone doing? Everyone okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good to be back in the
I
studio
think I'm going to go home and build a fort after this.
in some mud.
Perhaps. There's been plenty of mud here this year for like 30 seconds before it soaks into the
desert
Ground that is hell.
Yeah, washes away the load of scorpions in the backyard or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, that's good old Arizona for you. I'm going to jump right into the monologue. This episode is interesting. It's an interesting one.
As opposed to the other ones?
Yeah, as opposed to the really interesting other ones. This one's just interesting. So I grew up in a time, much like a lot of our listeners, in which there seemed to be some universal baseline when it came to discussion. At least that's what it seemed like. We can all potentially agree on some things, not all, but some. And in the event of a disagreement, we would still die for one another's right to speak. I'm talking about 8-year-olds. We would go to war for each other's right to speak. I know that was true for me. Was it true for you, Beowulf?
to go to war.
Go to war.
Speak.
Would you?
Me, I am nothing but a
Traitor.
a young woman who needs to be on the lifeboat first.
Oh, God.
And I will stay home and defend the house.
Would you make room on the door for Jack? That's the question.
Listen, she knew
She'd
Jack
push me
for
off.
48 hours. She had a guy waiting over here with a $2 million necklace.
Jack was kind of a creep. Just a little bit. And we'll have an episode on that.
I understand the
realize he
romance,
was
but
Irish.
I'm
He's
just
still a creep.
thinking, in a literal sense, why on earth would she literally just
Well,
basically write it, like sign her death
Well,
warrant,
I'm gonna-
death warrant, whatever.
I'm
Go
going to
ahead.
reel you back in because that's a different episode. We
Yeah,
have it in the works. It's going to be hilarious.
I think she pried his fingers off the edge of the...
Prop, she did. Yeah, she literally pulled them off, and he was like, "No." But I've come to the realization, though, back to the monologue, that the Overton window, when it comes to politics and discussion, has shrunk when it comes to the acceptable groups and their vocalizations, but has grown when it comes to the general manner of things. What was once considered unthinkable or radical can be stated with passion and transitioned into policy, depending on your affiliation. It can also be believed in silence if you're unwilling or unable to state your thoughts openly. Lawmakers have decided that it is their duty to shift the Overton window, and radicalized ideologies have come along for the ride. If you're a lefty, 1 in 4 of your peers believes men can get pregnant according to a poll conducted by WPA Intelligence from August 22nd to the 25th. According to polls from 6 months after the election, 66% of Republicans believe that things were not legitimate. I'm making these totally different observations, not because I'm demonizing either of them, but because depending on your group, they are irrefutable. And God forbid, if you refute it in any way, there will be hell or ridiculously higher taxes to pay. 5 to 10 years ago, 1 in 4 of your peers believed you were crazy if you believed in immaculate penile conception. And on the inverse, 66% or more of people thought questioning elections 5 to 10 years ago and their legitimacy was ludicrous. So how then do we reach a friendly compromise? How do we bring the polar fields of discussion, both sitting on the fringes of sanity, back to an agreeable, discussable point? Is it even possible? Should we divorce like the Debbie Downers of society suggest? Or should we nut up like those who came before us and dare look each other in the eyes and figure out a way to move forward? I hope it's the second. The ironic thing about all this is that many resort to rage quitting when the subject gets a little too dicey, especially if it's about Sir Sniffs your kids in the White House. The desire for validation often outweighs the importance of natural discourse, and in turn, it creates a Russian roulette style in society of conversation that we have today. I think this can and will change, though, and the best way that we have to figure this out is to learn about what causes it and to move forward through that confusion. And honestly, in my opinion, the thing that causes all these problems is the abuse of creeping normality. That's what I think it is.
Creeping normality.
Creeping normality.
It's an interesting
Is that a term?
collision of words, is it not?
Or did you come up with that term?
That is an actual term.
Okay, creeping normality.
It's kind of interesting, too, because normality, obviously, it's supposedly, most people think of normality as being right down the center lane, man, right? Just everything is even. It's the median, right? Or the average, I should say, even better. And then creeping can be considered in a couple of different ways. Either something you would think of about as a weed, maybe, creeping through the garden, or as a creepy person and or something that is infiltrating the normality that's there. Now, in your definition, I think what you're talking about is the movement of what we consider normal today in one direction or another, as mentioned by the Overton window that you talked about.
Yes, and basically the discussion today is going to kind of go around a lot of there's various forms of creeping normality, and all of us have probably heard about them, but they all tie into each other. a very famous one is the boiling frog metaphor. I'm sure we both have heard it.
I've heard that.
For our listeners and our viewers, it is scientifically inaccurate for clarification, but it is a poignant apologue of the boiling frog, and it goes something like this. If a frog is put into boiling water, it will jump out. But if a frog is put into room temperature water, which is then brought to a boil slowly, it will not perceive the danger and will be cooked to death. This metaphor is often invoked in support of a slippery slope argument as a caution against creeping normality. Now, the interesting thing that I've come to determine after researching this and reading about it is I think creeping normality doesn't go in one direction. I think it goes both ways.
Yes, absolutely does.
And I think the conspiracy, if we were to say there is any conspiracy surrounding it, and this might be a little hard to formulate, so bear with me. The conspiracy is that those who impose the things tied to creeping normality want you to think that observing the creeping normality as a negative is bad. I think that's the conspiracy. They don't want you to notice that. They want you to think everything is good, everything is dandy.
I think it's even more complicated than that. And I'm just going to bring this up, and I think Bale should jump in and give her 2 cents here because I don't want to override some of her thoughts that are coming through. I can see them, coming out of that.
Festering, boiling.
Gaelic, that's right. Yeah, but
like a frog.
we had somebody on. We had somebody on a month ago, Professor Jocelyn, and he talked about the polarization of things, and he was talking specific to politics and to gun laws and going in different. And he was talking about a lot of different things, but he was basically saying that the priorities line up to push people in opposite directions. Now, using that as context, let's think about this Overton window thing for a second, because an Overton window is designed to show a linear view, the pendulum almost, as it were, where there's something that's normal or considered fairly
Popular,
normal in the middle.
Standard, yeah.
There's actually...
Brought a graph, a very important graph.
So that I could remember. Anyways, the bottom line, the policy is kind of designed from supposedly what is sitting in the middle of the Overton window. And on either side of this diagram, there are popular things, sensible things, acceptable things that go finally to radical and unthinkable things. And those unthinkable things, as the wolf was talking about, are at the far extremes of both sides when we're talking about politics or really any idea. And a lot of people believe that the function of one side or another of a argument, the radical side, is to pull that Overton window in that direction. And I think it's actually more complicated than that, because I think there's almost a sub-window going on, and they're being pulled in opposite directions. Or they're really not, but one side is of the belief that it's happening. Because if you talk to the left-hand side, the progressive radicals, they will tell you everything is getting more conservative and more authoritarian and more populist and more all this other stuff that they don't like. And then you talk to the far-right radicals, and they'll say everything has gone, off the reservation as far as the left is concerned, way off the reservation. So both those things can't be true at the same time, can they?
I think they can. I do. And
not if you're talking about a holistic view
here's
of
the
this
thing.
window.
I don't think it's holistic. I think it's fabricated. So I think the Overton window is intentionally supposed to be a holistic approach, right? So it's tending to politics and obviously polis, the discussion of society, and where people have debate and open discussion about ideas. That is controlled, in my opinion. And I think when I was talking about the conspiracy, what I meant by that is you have a conglomerate of individuals who are aware of this Overton window. They understand that there are certain views on both ends that can be prodded and pushed and pulled, and they intentionally prod and push those views in order to manipulate both sides in such a way where someone who is on the left thinks, oh my God, the KKK is at the door, and then someone on the right thinks, oh my God, everyone's a communist. And I think that causes a problem because it has people get to this point where they can't notice the Overton window, and what I mean by that is they don't notice that these things are shifting in opposite directions of their intent. And past that point, you have that group that I'm talking about, that group that controls these things, not allowing anyone but their own peers to talk about it, which I think is part of that creeping normality, because they don't let anyone outside of the group chat. They don't.
Well, I would say this has to do with more of most people living on social media and using platforms with AI functions like algorithms that show them the same of what they pay most attention to. So if you're talking about this window going both ways at the same time, yeah, someone, who is, let's just say, a conservative who's constantly consuming conservative content, they're seeing, a lot of people agree with me. This is crazy. And this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger over here. And then on the other side of the coin, you have someone who would say, oh, they're very liberal, and they're seeing a lot of the same things as well going in the opposite direction. So could you factor that into this and saying it just really depends on the person at that point? Because I have a feeling when I talk to people and they're talking about their political beliefs, they seem to always assume no matter what that you're on their side if you're their friend. Until, of course, you get into it, and then, especially the last couple of years, friendships have ended, families have had issues. But it also seems that at least in people who are comfortable with you in like a very basic sense, they tend to believe that if this person is friendly with me, they must agree with me politically.
So, but there's a couple of things I want to unpack there, okay, if we can. The first of which is algorithms. Okay, so the algorithms kind of have behind the curtain
fabrications.
There's two things that drive algorithms. One is crunching big data, historical big data, because that's the only thing you have, right? You don't have future data, you have historical data. So what these algorithms do is they pull information from all these different data points, and they conclude based on previous habits from all the people using a platform, as your, for instance, Bale, is that this is what people are wanting. And what happens on top of that is there's a layer so that's driving an understanding of where people are at. Mm-hmm. So using the Overton window description, it's driving an understanding of where the AI, the historical data, believes that conversation framework is. Mm-hmm. Then there's a second part to the AI, though. It's where do you want it to go? Yeah. You see, that's the part that's worrisome, because I think what's happening is you have this real window that develops into policy, mm-hmm. which we all can see around us. We can talk about 15 different subjects that all have to do with what we thought 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago was absolutely crazy is now policy. So that tells you that window can shift, or better yet, that the definitions of what is crazy shifts into a window. But the other side of that, again, is that if you have a layer, any one of the platforms, that says, hey, this is the behavior I really want to drive. The behavior is here in this window, but I kind of am out here, and I want to drive this behavior. So how do I do that? I make sure that I have some kind of that formula that pushes people to see more and more on the edges of whatever that is, right or left.
Well, that's why I think that it's no longer holistic. I think it's fabricated, because almost everything as shown, whether you're on the right or the left now, because time has passed long enough to be able to show both positions to be true, everything is manipulated by social media. Everything's manipulated by online activity. And these, to your point, Bull, these algorithms are fabricated somewhere. And we did an episode on, all these big companies and how they lean and how they view things and their personal perceptions on what they truly believe to be authoritarianism. And it's not authoritarian if they're doing it, but it's authoritarian if someone that they don't like is doing it. So, and obviously that goes both ways. That comes from the left and that comes from the right. So my big issue with this creeping normality is that what is now considered normal because of those algorithms would have been unthinkable very shortly ago.
Right.
And what I mean by that is not in the sense that people would sit down and bring it up. It wouldn't even be on the register. I mean, because look,
you could just take any subject today.
Any subject.
You could take the subject of transgenderism. I mean, you can take that subject.
Transgenderism, all that stuff.
All that stuff used to be considered in the unthinkable side. Mm-hmm. And so let me give you this analogy, because having been in business for a very long time, I've got a philosophy on how to get to where you want to go from a business standpoint. Whether you're a salesperson out there or whether you're an entrepreneur trying to accomplish something, you have a product, whatever the case is, what you do is you determine where you want to be in a certain amount of time, wherever that is. So there's an old saying, put your goals in cement and your plans in sand, because you want to make sure that this is really truly what I want to do, but you also want to be nimble enough to know you might change those plans to get to where you're going to go. But the whole idea is to think backward. It's the old Stephen Covey thing, keep the end in mind. So if you have a goal that you want to have in 5 years, X amount of dollars in the bank, in this many clients, and doing this and whatever the case is, this is the goal. So between now and then is 5 years. You break it up into year increments, and then you break each of those years into quarters, and you break each of those into months, and you start stair-stepping backward where you need to be at certain time increments along the way. That is exactly what people do to shift the Overton window. Mm-hmm. So this can be a positive or a negative depending on your point of view. So if you want to talk about one of those subjects we just mentioned and say, okay, this transgenderism is normative. 10 years ago, I'd have gone, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. What do you mean that's normative? So then people talk about, they go, okay, that's the unthinkable.
Yeah.
Okay, the norm is here, the unthinkable is here. What in between do I have to create or change the language or the definition of to get people to move to that position?
But I don't think. Well, I agree with you. I think that's how it was done prior to that algorithmic change that we're talking about. Because if you were, I don't know if you've ever downloaded TikTok.
No.
How about Reels on Instagram when it started coming up?
Just recently.
And I don't know about any of you, but I know early on my algorithm was a very, very interesting mix of things that I would not have been tied into had I have, never touched it.
Well, that's the thing is when you make a new account, they blast you
intentionally. They
very
blast
intentionally
you.
The same thing, man or woman. That doesn't matter anymore in that sense.
No,
and it is very much. I mean, if you want to test it out right now,
inappropriate
do
shit.
it. So, it'll be young girls dancing.
So I had to have you change mine because I was like, why am I getting inundated with this stuff? I had no interest
like, start liking photos of
I had no idea even how to change it.
So my whole point though is I don't think you do. I think that you changing it is just a guise to have it be changed from your perception. The algorithm is the same. Yours is just tweaked slightly. You'll still get that shit every once in a while.
But this is what I meant by those data points. Right?
I understand. So my whole point coming back to where I was going originally is that this is more or less about someone who's controlling the remote control. They have a remote control pointed at the TV, and you say, "Oh, I want to watch sports," and they click it to sports, and then every once in a while they'll switch it to something ridiculous like I don't know, midday, drama.
Well,
and they say, "No, switch it back," and then you switch it back or switch it to Love Continent, and so this is out of your control.
Well, the reason
it's not something you can control.
Well, the reason that they do stuff like that, like say for example, you're someone like the nature example, you're someone who's really into like drone shots of forests and stuff. You get tons of content like that. Then every once in a while you get a video of someone dancing. You don't really care about the dancing. You don't really care about that. The reason they do that is because it's an addictive platform. It's like gambling. It's like a slot machine. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you lose. So you keep going until you find something you like.
Or they're just trying to determine. We watched a thing on Netflix a year and a half ago or something.
The Social Dilemma. I know.
Social Dilemma. And aren't they just trying to determine, they're trying to get more detail on who you are?
They are getting your detail.
But that's what they say.
But
I don't think it's all nefarious is my point.
I'm not saying it is.
The point is it's meant to be addictive.
Yeah, but I don't think
it's meant to be addictive. So this is what Mario Kart. That's why they have the sounds.
I don't think it's exactly the same.
All I'm saying is when you want a product that's going to be used over and over again, that's not a consumable like food or like cleaning products or something.
I now have Mario Kart in my head.
I'm just saying when you have an app, all the top apps do this. They make it an addictive thing.
But
like all the dating apps do this.
I don't think like I want to stop you there because there's a point that I want to make about this. I don't think you're wrong about the addictive nature of things. I think what's wrong about it is that is somehow a randomized thing that they have implemented into the algorithm.
I don't think it's random. I think they did it on purpose.
Okay, so back to my point is if they're doing it on purpose, And if we're talking about creeping normality, which is supposedly supposed to be a holistic thing and happens all the time with random things. People wore sandals, and then over time they realized sandals weren't effective, so they switched to boots, and then from boots to Nikes. Okay, so there's various forms of that. But if we're talking about a holistic approach, and if someone's controlling the buttons, then whether or not it's addictive is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, you're going to see what they want you to see. You walk into a casino, you're going to see slot machines. They're not going to throw a fucking giraffe in there for good measure just to see if you like giraffes.
It's just
like
it's the same as like on YouTube where I mean, this isn't confirmed, but I think it's pretty obvious that there's favorites, right, that are pushed like recommended.
You mean owned? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Mm-hmm. It's probably the same thing. And think about AI. AI is created by man and trained, quote unquote, by us using the platform. So,
see, but again, this and I think Bull's right about it all not being nefarious, but recent events would show that it's only partially true.
Well, I think it can be used
same.
both ways. Is whole.
I would say that it's used more nefariously than otherwise, and the reason I say that is because Twitter came out and was like, "Oh yeah, no, all of our stuff is totally real. All of our stuff isn't bots," and they were lying.
Wolf, I think part of that's very not intentional, though. Not intentional.
I
really do.
Have you heard,
you can't think that.
hate watching before?
Hate watching.
Hate watching. It's a term online. No. It's a term that people use when something they disagree with or someone they don't like, they very, very much don't like, they will purposely seek out their content to watch it or listen to it. Mm-hmm. They don't like it. Usually they join in like a Reddit group or something to, talk about it together and how much they don't like the person or the content or whatever. So how does that factor in here? Because that's something they don't agree with or a person they don't like, or they like, say, politically. Like, for example, think of a controversial political figure, Donald Trump. How many people on the left would hate watch Donald Trump or follow his tweets adamantly?
But I don't know if
so does that factor into what you're talking about? Because they disagree, but they're consuming the content even more, and it's more active in
the
their
reason
lives.
I don't think so is because this is someone going out of their way using the platform. I'm talking about how it sits as it is by itself. To Bull's point, in almost every episode we've had, anything that's not used is just a paperweight. A gun, a phone, anything that's not used is a paperweight. So by itself, an algorithm, what is it by itself? What does it do by itself? And if the intent of something like Instagram, when you boot up Instagram on your phone or you boot up your phone, and the intent is to show you dancing underage girls, how is that on accident?
I don't get those videos.
I'm not saying, well, then obviously they know that we're male, which is really insidious. And when it comes to, Twitter and stuff like that, I don't think that it's all nefarious, but you don't accidentally create bots. You don't accidentally lie about, your numbers. You don't accidentally try and sway things when it comes to the legitimacy of free and open elections.
Technologies in general are rife with this because even only usually the first adopters of certain technologies have the wherewithal to understand kind of where it's coming from, where it's going. Mm-hmm. Blockchain is a great example of that today. If you talked about blockchain to most average layman out there, they go, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Blocks? What blocks? Bricks? What, I have no idea. But so the undercurrent of that is if you are very intelligent about blockchain or about AI algorithms, then you know how to manipulate them. And in our society, where the driving force is capitalism and bringing money home, and your stock is, you're going to blow that into the $1 billion category and be the next unicorn, then whether you're trying to be, a good citizen or not, you tend to, and I'm not excusing any of this. I'm really not trying to do it. I'm just saying these things tighten over time. And they tighten through competition. They tighten through the clientele either not or using those platforms. In those, for instance, so back to your point though, because this creeping normality is very interesting to me as it attaches itself to the Overton window theme, if you will. And the nature of this lends itself to pushing people or pulling people in directions that a very elite few can guide.
Yeah, inside traders.
Inside traders, the people that know the algorithms, the people that are biased or are owned by left or right-leaning this and that.
So that's why I think there's an argument for decentralization, right? That but
you can see that you can see that is a driving force on a lot of individuals, but it's the opposite of what the governments who we are supposedly giving this power to want.
Yeah, and that's why I think, to the point of like hate watching, to Beowulf's point, I think that it applies if we're talking about universal free activity. Right. So if we're talking about someone watching Donald Trump because they hate Donald Trump, one, I think the numbers of that are significantly lower than people think they are. I think they're inflated. I think people who look at that want to utilize that as an excuse to explain away a form of obsession, which is likely something that people need to go get help for instead of utilizing social media for it. But when it comes to like back to the boiling frog thing, or even when you're talking about the decentralization of things, like when it came to blockchain, or when it came hopefully one day when it comes to the internet.
Decentralized finance is the big thing right now.
Hopefully it goes that way, because that'll be better for everybody.
Look who's going to get control of it. The banks are trying to control that.
Well, if we don't let them control it.
The centralized banks are trying to be the biggest DeFi.
The idea is to not let them control it. And that's why we have this problem, because creeping normality suggests that, we're going to introduce this thing that's a great new idea, but eventually, we need someone to take, Bull, we need you to handle that. We need you to be the face of DeFi, because how we wouldn't be able to operate by itself independently. That would be utter chaos. It would be free enterprise, and we don't want that. And, when it comes to the boiling frog syndrome, just to get us back on track, it's been utilized across the board for anything and everything. And it's a good example. I mean, people can utilize it, but it was used in the 60s against those who were sympathetic towards the Soviet Union. It was used in the 80s by survivalists when it came to the impending collapse of civilization. Believe it or not, we have been in impending collapse since the 80s.
Forever.
Has that ever changed?
No. And in the 90s, and it was and still is about inaction in response to climate change. And we have been climate changing forever. And it's also been used by my ilk, the libertarians, in warning about the slow erosion of civil liberties. So we've engaged in the nonsense too. But really, the metaphor is like I want to say it's the could be pronouncing this wrong, the Sorites paradox, which describes a hypothetical heap of sand from which individual grains are removed one at a time, and it eventually asks if there's a specific point when it can no longer be defined as a heap.
It's all perspective.
It's all perspective.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Grains of sand can be defined as giant boulders if you're looking at it from the minute. Correct. So it's always perspective. It's always perspective.
Yeah.
And it's funny because this whole thing we're talking about, slippery slope, frog boiling kind of stuff, and Overton window, creeping normality,
gradualism.
They all, yeah. And everybody out there has heard me say a million times, I'm an incrementalist, right? Which is code for I want to move slow, methodical. I know it's not the bull's nature. I'd rather crash through the china shop, but it's, hey, I believe that because the thing that's happening now that is disconcerting about this is I watch the Overton window changing. Growing, shrinking is maybe more accurate from my point of view, but I watch it changing, but at the same time, there's this element that says, no, burn it down, start over. And that's not creeping normality.
That's expanding. That would be the expanding of the Overton window.
But it's not, but that's not creeping.
No, I understand.
You know what I mean? It's like setting off a bomb.
Yeah. Well, so go ahead, Bill.
Oh, I was just going to say, think of how slowly things, quote, changed in comparison to the last 50 years. You remember a time when internet wasn't a thing. We don't.
I remember a time when only a handful of people, scientists in the world, were even thinking about this idea of interconnecting computers.
But just think about that a second. That was not that long ago.
No, it wasn't.
We don't remember a time when internet wasn't a thing. And think of how huge of a change that is. We're sitting here, whoever's watching or listening to this is listening to it on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think to back to that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's a valid point. Back to the Bull's observation, though, I think you said something that's unique. You said for you feel that the Overton window is closing.
No, I think what I mean is that it's a lot of people talk about the sliding scale, this Overton window that slides in one direction or another toward these radical or unexpected ideas. I think instead of that, what's happened is that the policy middle in the normalized central area, instead of having it slide in one direction or another, it's expanding to include everything.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's what I meant by the conspiratorial nature of things.
Well, I think that's absolutely the wrong way to think. Let me qualify this properly, because I think people should be able to talk about everything, radical or not, that they want to, and determine, because that's kind of part of human nature to move the needle at least a little bit in one direction. The problem I have is that when people start to understand this and are guided in a nefarious manner or an AI manner or an algorithmic manner to intentionally take radical ideas and try to put them in the center, and they don't maybe they don't even know they don't have the majority of people believing that, because I know I'm babbling a little bit, but the way I look at it is more like a Venn diagram than a sliding scale.
Yeah.
So you've got this central communication control, and we had more than one podcast about the legacy media platform.
All the Overton window. They have the entire thing. They have control of all.
Right, but instead of a slide, I want you to think about it like a wheel. Okay, you've got media in the middle. And I say media, but it's the communication element, right? The ability to disseminate information and control information is key to every single thing we're talking about here. And attached to that by spokes are all the other elements: radical left, radical right, more centralized, but off a little bit to this way, and that. Anything you can think about, any subject you can think about, is surrounding that. And the idea would be that media element in the middle, that hub in the middle, is giving equal time to all of it. Right? There's actually laws in place that say you have to give equal time advertising to political parties. They don't do it. They just simply censor one versus another these days, right? But my whole point is, if you think of it as a Venn diagram, the window itself, the Overton window, is a circle that encompasses at least a portion of all of that, with the radical elements being outside that Overton window. And now what's happening is it's become oblong, or it's become dysfunctionally it's not even a circle anymore.
Yeah,
because it's reaching out further to one way or reaching out to another, and it's unbalanced. And that's the problem we have, because it unbalances everything.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good visual. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that visual personally. I see it more of just a 3-line graphs or 4-line graphs, and the main graph is the media, powers that be, all the people who are wealthy, all the people who are in power, all the people who have money, all the people who are living lives that are nothing like anyone else's, who live in their own bubbles. Then you got people on the right, people on the left, and people who are othered, which are people who are not affiliated because they're tired of the nonsense. And the people who are on the right or the left on any given 4-year period or 8-year period are a part of that window, in which the window expands to include them, and it tailors to their own policies and their own viewpoints. But if you're not a part of the group, then your Overton window closes. So my whole point is, what you said earlier is, I think, what is a little bit more accurate in my opinion, because I think right now, for people who don't agree with the popular narrative, the Overton window for those individuals, where they can speak, what they can say, how they can think, all that jazz,
it does not
is
include
smaller.
Them.
It doesn't include them.
It doesn't include them at all, unless they're willing to change.
Well, unless they're willing not to change, unless they're willing to become a part of the Borg. So it's not necessarily changing. It's just involving yourself with the ideas of others and silently fighting against it.
Jean-Luc became part of the Borg, but he got out of that.
You're speaking a different language to me. I've never watched
Jean-Luc Picard? Oh, I'm sorry.
I've seen maybe 1 or 2 episodes. Yeah,
Same guy that played Dr.
No, I know who it is.
X, or whatever his name was.
Professor
Psycho.
Xavier. Professor Xavier. Yeah.
Psycho.
Psycho.
Professor Psycho.
Professor Psycho from X-Men.
No, I would agree with that. But I think my point, and I didn't describe it very well because I needed a whiteboard to do it, I think. But
circles.
But exactly. It is that those that control the dissemination of the information control the size and scope and what fits into that window. Period. End of story.
Now, here's the thing: is I don't necessarily know if it's ever been as bad as it currently is today. I don't think it has been, because I think that there was a way to separate yourself. And we've had this discussion about, so I was going to grab my phone, but it's right there looking at me. You had this thing about social media and whether you can separate yourself today and not utilize it. I tend to be on the very cynical, no, you can't. You have to be involved by proxy. You have to be because of jobs and all that jazz. Now, obviously, there's another discussion, whole nother podcast for that. But I personally think that it's never, like, the creeping normality has never moved quite as fast as it currently is today, and nor do I think the Overton window has never been as manipulatable.
See, I think I just think you hit the number one thing about all of this that disrupts our psyche and our human nature around all these different subjects: the speed. Mm-hmm. We all these things we talk about have happened numerous times throughout history.
Yeah.
But they've happened in cycles.
Much slower.
In a nice, slow, methodical, incremental way. Maybe not always.
With the exception of war and stuff like that.
Well, war is one of those tipping point, historical moments where that tends to change a lot of things, and usually either speeds up or destroys, or both, certain portions of our ability as civilized human beings to progress.
Yeah.
But in general, these things have happened throughout time. The problem now is it's happening in supersonic speed.
Well, and the question that I have then is it's maybe shouldn't be referred to as creeping normality or gradualism anymore. Because the idea of gradualism, as we've discussed very briefly, but so people have a really clear understanding, concise understanding, is it's when a major change can be accepted as normal and acceptable as long as it happens slowly through small, often unnoticeable increments of change.
They tell you to do this when you're trying to make a goal, like you were talking about earlier.
Every single thing, positive or negative. I mean, whether you try to make a goal or whether you try to...
Small, seemingly insignificant decisions. Mm-hmm. Or in this case, increments of change.
What was the book? You probably remember it off the top of your head. It's a great book. Slight Edge. Slight Edge.
Yes.
And I don't remember the author's name, but it's all about this. Mm. And it is the philosophy actually behind compound interest, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Unnoticeable, minute additions.
Jeff Olson.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why, to be very clear to our audience and our viewers, this is not negative or positive. It just is. It is a thing. And just a little bit of background about creeping normality. Jared Diamond in 2005, he wrote a book called Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. Hilarious name, kind of. And his theory was used to describe why Easter Island natives would chop down the last tree on their island. And I quote, "I suspect, though, that the disaster happened not with a bang, but with a whimper. After all, there are those hundreds of abandoned statues to consider. The forest the islanders depended on for rollers and rope didn't simply disappear one day. It vanished slowly over decades." Now,
there's some evidence that they did more than just chop down trees at the end. They were like consuming each other.
Yeah.
So you read about Easter Island and some of the things that happened there, that society might have been changed by drought, might have been changed by a lot of different things. Matter of fact, there was a main lake or pond that started to evaporate over a decades period of time that really sent things again to a tipping point.
Yeah.
And that's a Malcolm Gladwell book, by the way, that I would recommend as well, Tipping Point, because I have always thought of it from a scientific background. I like to call it phase transition. And I truly do. This is something I've thought of over years and years and years because, think of one element. Water. It's got three basic states, right? It's a solid, ice, and it's liquid, water, and then it's a gas.
Vapor.
It's a vapor, excuse me. Not a gas, a vapor.
Yeah.
You're absolutely, whatever. But the whole point is those things, the gradualistic nature of it does not occur. Mm-hmm. The temperature changes, the frog in the water changes, right?
Yeah.
But if you start with ice and you gradually increase the temperature, it doesn't start to change till when? What temperature? Fahrenheit. Come on, guys. Come on, science
Boiling
experts.
Point?
No. Change to water.
Oh, water, 32
Thank you
Fahrenheit.
very much. Okay, you get a gold star over there.
Right.
But,
it's been a while since I was in high school.
And then it doesn't change until it hits the boiling point again.
Yeah. I got ahead of myself.
So those things, its state. This is my point about the current nature of this creeping normality or this Overton window. It's like it's like you think about a pendulum swinging nice and easily back and forth. And you say, okay, we're going back and forth. We change over time, cycles, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. It's like it stays a certain state for a period of time, and then bam, something happens and
so
it changes to the next
we've,
state.
we've hit the
That's what it feels like.
boiling point or freezing point?
No, I would say
good question. Right,
I would say neither. I would say it was obviously either or, but it wasn't something that holistically occurred.
I guess
it was something
just
that was
a question
forced.
of glass half full or half empty.
Yeah, but the glass half full
What do I always
argument.
say?
The glass half full argument should always be based around something in a controlled situation being measured out evenly to begin with, and we can talk about evaporation or all that jazz. In this instance, someone just took the water and poured it out.
But see, the state in which something is right now is the state we all believe in our life period. There is a starting point.
Yeah.
There is a stasis that we believe is that equilibrium spot that is what we like, what we share in common with the rest of the normality, the middle of that Overton window. And the problem is this is why we talk about generations so much and how it's very interesting to me, because what is normal for your generation is seriously not normal for mine.
Yeah, but you guys were the one that made all the changes.
Well,
So it would have to be normal for
but
you
we
guys.
might have, but here's the thing. We might have made changes little baby steps at a time.
No,
And
no.
let me finish. By the time you got around into a place where you were thinking about this stuff, the state of equilibrium, instead of being here, was here, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And so your normal stasis, your your belief that the norm is here.
See, I disagree with that, and I disagree with that, and it's not
Well, you're
because
wrong,
of you.
but that's
I'm not,
okay.
I'm not at all.
You have the right to be wrong, and I'll die for that right to be
Well,
wrong.
and it's not because of you. It's because of generalities, and I don't think you're a part of any of it. But with that being said, I would say that the demographic that we just brought up was also probably engaging in what I would consider to be lingqi, which is actually the Chinese tactic
is that
associated.
the Korean cabbage that they put underground? And
Be careful.
Kimchi?
kimchi.
Yeah, no, lingqi.
I know, I'm joking. My goodness.
Let's be careful, Mister. We changed all the rules, not us. Lingqi, translated variously as a slow process, lingering death, slow slicing, or the death by 1,000 cuts. Also ties into creeping normality. Now, the term lingqi first appeared in a line in chapter 28 of the 3rd century BCE philosophical text. I'm going to butcher this. Qinzi. The line originally described the difficulty of traveling in a horse-drawn carriage on a mountainous terrain. Later, it was used to describe the prolonging of a person's agony when the person is being killed. An alternative theory suggests that the term originated from the Khitan language, as the penal meaning of the word emerged during the Khitan Liao dynasty. Originally a form of torture and execution used in China and in Vietnam and Korea from roughly 900 CE up to the early 1900s. It actually ended in 1905. A knife was used to methodically remove portions of the body over an extended period, resulting in death. Or if you're the demographic that I'm talking about, you slowly, incrementally raise the prices of houses because of the view, baby, until they cannot be owned by anyone but banks.
Well, here's the thing. How...
Lingqi.
I think the banks did that.
Well, here's something to consider. A friend just told us this the other day. Because a lot of people say, well, the only way you're going to get a house now is if your family gives you the house they bought.
OnlyFans.
If your family, you have a family house that you've had since you were a kid and you're going to inherit it one day. Well, the thing to consider is, sure, but you still have to pay property tax on that house, and your property tax is going to be assessed once your parents end up willing the house to you. It's going to be assessed in whatever year it is today, not the 35, 45 years, 55 years ago when they bought it, which means you still might not be able to afford that house.
Plus, on top of that now, the capital gains tax, right? Not capital gains
And,
tax. The death tax is coming back, right?
Right.
Because God knows everybody needs to collect their money, so that, let's go down that road again.
Bottom line is that, house ownership is still possible. It's just that.
But okay,
that
let's
window
roll
has
forward
been-
on this. Okay,
Yeah.
let's use this as an example of the Overton window, creeping normality. Okay, back in the late 90s, and I don't remember the name of the rule that happened during the Senate put together during the Clinton administration that was trying to help everybody get what the American dream was.
Was that the assault weapons ban?
Exactly that too. No, the
Get a
American
house.
dream became and was forwarded as this idea of everybody needs to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only way we can make that happen as a government is to help those that can't help themselves as well in that, or a little light on the down payment, or a little bit on the side of more risk for the banks. So we're going to tell the banks that they must have a certain amount of people that are on the riskier side allowed to have mortgages, because we want everybody to have a house. Okay?
Right.
So roll that forward in 2008, kaboom. There's a lot of things we could talk about along that line. But so now, okay, the radical idea, right? The unacceptable Overton window frame, unthinkable or radical. Nobody owns a house anymore. Nobody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lynchy.
Well, that's
Okay.
what we're. That's. I mean,
Death
that's
by
what,
1,000 cuts.
Is that really so radical anymore? Talking about it
Who
today?
was no? It's in fact it's expected. Who was it who said in a couple of years you'll own nothing and be happy? I mean, they're
Klaus
pushing
Schwab.
for that now.
Yeah.
You know, saying that.
It's Klaus Schwab.
Okay,
Well, if
yeah.
you make everything unaffordable, then you must be dependent on someone else.
And it was the World Economic Forum.
And that's what happens. And so if you have to be dependent on someone else, we're going to have a power structure in place to handle those that need to be dependent on you.
The World Economic Forum,
But-
comprised of everyone who's not a millennial.
So what are we going to do? Are we going
so-
to have like the same thing they had back in
Yes, feudal
England,
times.
for example,
Yep.
where you had a lord of the land and your little section of
Yeah, we already do.
plot that would rent out?
You already do. What do you think student loans are? What do you think house loans are? The lord of your land is the bank. You take money from them to pay for the thing, and you're indentured to them for the period of time until you pay it off. It's always been the case.
Well,
we've just transitioned
you
things.
do realize, from a very technical standpoint, any money you have in the bank is not yours.
Yeah, 100%.
All the bank does is say, give me your money so that I can invest, and I'll give you a little bit back.
And the
I'll give you
guarantee,
I'll
quote
keep it
unquote,
safe.
guarantee
It's not a
here
guarantee.
is
It's not a
that
guarantee.
It's an IOU.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's all you have is an IOU from a bank.
And here's
And
where
most people are like,
well, and
what?
this is where, and this is like the financial thing that we were watching a little bit ago with that one guy. This is where I think people get wrapped up on this, and this is why, again, I want to make it very clear. I think the bull and all of his friends that are in the demographic, they're the only good ones. My point being, the people who are in power structures, the people who are making these changes, are the ones to be at blame, in my opinion. And when I mean to bring up Ling Chi, it is almost utilized today. That idea, that creeping normality, that gradualization, and other forms that we're talking about. Eventually, we'll talk about the normalization of deviance and tyranny of small decisions. All of these things are being utilized against a populace that has done, according to the populace, no wrong. The people in power don't see it that way for some reason. And the reason
you know why?
Because it's always that way. They don't want to lose power. That's the only life, death, and the struggle between power bases are the three things that are given and guaranteed in life.
They believe they're at the tipping point with enough energy behind them, with enough people.
That they'll never have to ever change anything ever again. Yeah.
They truly believe that.
I think they're right. And that's why
Well, I hope they're not.
Well, that's why I say people, they're closing the door. And I'm going to keep saying that because that's what's happening. So I don't know. I mean, normally the death of 1,000 cuts, obviously the historical aspect behind that has been a little westernized and isn't entirely accurate, and we'll get into that in a second. But it was normally reserved for people who did heinous crimes. So like treason, matricide, patricide.
Matricide?
Matricide.
Killing mattresses?
Yeah. Treason, mass murder, the murder of one's master or employer, which would be considered petty treason.
That's mastercide. I'm sorry. I had to.
Yeah,
Gotta
it
lighten
was
up
great.
somewhat.
That was really great. So the process obviously was not as accurate from our perspective. Like when they say death by 1,000 cuts, it's not really what it means. According to the Confucian principle of filial piety, to alter one's body or to cut the body are considered unfilial practices. Ling Chi therefore contravenes the demands of filial piety. In addition, to be cut in pieces meant that the body of the victim would not be whole in spiritual life after death. This method of execution became a fixture in the image of China among some Westerners. In the Yuan dynasty, 100 cuts were inflicted, but by the Ming dynasty, there were records of 3,000 incisions. It is described as a fast process lasting no more than 15 to 20 minutes. Reason being is because you would eventually pass out from, blood loss or exhaustion or pain. And I think that in a very slow way, in a gradual way, is happening right now. If you can look at the economic situation right now in the country. And it could shift. It could shift. I mean, I don't want to be Debbie Downer. It could. But right now it's
the old story of the dog on the porch, right?
And
those that are in power think that we're the dog on the porch, and should I tell the story? Nah. Should I?
No. I mean, you
like
can.
that story? No.
You can tell it. I mean, go ahead.
Tell the story.
We got things. I've like 9 pages of notes here. We have to go through all the various forms.
Well, I mean, I don't want to, give the audience death by 1,000 cuts by telling him any more bad dad jokes.
Go ahead and tell the.
So no, I'll
just
leave
did
the
one
dog
more.
alone.
You did one more.
No,
you did another one.
I know. Over and over.
You're uncontrollable.
No, the whole point is that we've got a populace that is complaining like crazy, like a dog howling on a porch that won't move off the nail he's laying on, and nobody knows why. Because the answer. You remember the answer? The punchline to that whole thing is because it doesn't hurt bad enough.
You can't move an entire group of people that are sustained by a system that was set up intentionally to fail.
That's what we're talking about, is moving them.
No.
I talk about moving them incrementally or gradually.
No. That's the point that we're getting at. But what the situation is the game is already fixed against them. You can't take the checkerboard and flip it and say, okay, we're going to start all over again, unless we go back to the burn everything down message. You can't take a system.
That is what's going on.
I know. So my whole point being is you want everyone to get off the nail. Getting off the nail requires them to throw out the system that we have for years been like, oh, this is fantastic. This is wonderful.
No, the nail is being pounded up in them. I mean, that's what's going on, man. It's
what a way to put that.
The nail's being hammered right into us.
That's what's going on. It's not like the nail was sticking up and the dog laid on it and said, I ain't getting off.
So that's
the dog laid down and somebody keeps tapping on the nail.
Yeah, so that's the difference in stories, right? Because the original
it
story.
doesn't just hurt.
I get that.
Yeah,
because you're lying on it. It also hurts because someone keeps.
It's like someone holding you down and nailing something into you is what it comes down to.
There is a process going on right now in this country first, because we want to be the frickin' first at everything, I don't know why the hell we do that. But in any event, we're trying to be first at all. Look, 3 years ago, there were people in Washington touting a multi-trillion-dollar Green New Deal. Mm-hmm. 95% of the people out there were laughing their asses off at this. No, why would anybody do that? Why would you spend money for the next 4 generations to try to change our country away from something that actually built the country? There's nobody out there, very few people out there, that don't believe we can get cleaner and better at what we do, and don't believe that we need to move toward a better model of energy consumption and distribution and all that kind of stuff. But we've gone from that 3 years ago to that is exactly what's happening now.
Yeah.
That is the primary example, one of the primary examples today of that Overton window being moved right across something that was incalculable 3 years ago.
It was only moved, though, because a group of individuals literally unilaterally were put into a position of power where they control everything.
Every part of the media that dominates the communication repeats that over and over and over and over and over and over,
because they're all a part of the same group. So
my point.
Yes. So and you're right. So the point that I think is the problem here is that originally it's not supposed to be one unilateral group operating as a hive mind in an agreement. That's something that I think needs to be understood by people on the left and the right. We get into this weird echo chamber of, if I sit down with someone who's a liberal and I say, I don't agree with your position on crime or transgenderism and sexuality or on taxes or on literally anything. If I sit down and have one inkling of a disagreement, everything becomes World War III. The same goes for the other end. If I sit down with someone and say, you know what, I think questioning the legitimacy of every election going forward is going to be a consistent thing because we keep bringing up the narrative, the world gets set on fire. The problem isn't necessarily the gradual movement of things. The problem is the overreaction on behalf of people who believe they have to think like their friends. Right? Am I wrong in saying that? Am I wrong in saying that everyone who's a part of these groups deep in it, literally, I am a Borg. I say the same thing. A plus B equals C. They all say the same thing.
Well, this might come back to a tangential topic, but a lack of community that has disappeared in a lot of ways over the past.
When did community mean echoing the ideas of everyone around you?
Community.
A lot. I think
every single idea?
Well, there's nuance in everything, but at the same time, think about it. Even the communities that were still established, I mean, schools, work, church, places where people usually have some sort of community were all sent home for years. And then it got normalized that you keep it online where you have, like we said, these AI situations that are manipulating what you think is normal. Because I could sit here, I can think of two people off the top of my head who are completely opposite ends of the coin politically, who both think different things are completely normal. And they're radically different, like radical. Both of them push to the edge.
There's no consensus anymore because there's no community. Is what
so
you're saying.
It's whatever you want to believe. That's what's normal.
I don't think that there's no consensus. I think that there is an over requirement of consensus on both ends. You can't be a part of the in-group unless you parrot everything the in-group says. That's why I think we have the issues that we have. Because if I sit down with a group of conservatives who are hyper-conservative, there is data to suggest that they're a little bit more open to alternative ideas, believe it or not, which is weird because you wouldn't think that's the case today. There is data to suggest that. We should have an episode on that because that would be an interesting episode. On the other end of the spectrum, though, if I said certain things, I'd be kicked out of the group immediately just by saying those certain things. That's why it's hard. As we were talking with Professor Joslin, it was really hard to talk with him about being in the middle. Not because I don't agree with it, because I do agree with it, and that's how I like to operate in a lot of ways. But because if I operated in that way in real life, I don't think I'd have a lot of friends. Frankly, I don't. I think people have become so polarized, yes, to your point on the technology, but also to the point that the argument is no longer a consensus of ideas, an open forum of ideas. It's a closed forum of ideas.
And that goes all the way back to what I was talking about with this idea of the polarization and or the window is so narrow.
But it's narrow on both ends.
The acceptable window is narrow. But it's narrow for different spectrums. Mm-hmm. So it's crazy because it's a redefinition. We talked about this in other podcasts as well. Is there's this redefinition going on about everything, and part of that is to normalize what is not. But to your point earlier, I mean, there's always been groups, the in groups, the out groups. I mean, just think about high school. Think about your high school and all the different groups that were there. You got the jocks and the burnouts and the eggheads and the this and that was kind of the way all high schools were. Maybe it's changed over time since my generations, but there was still people very rarely were in multiple groups or accepted by all of them as a whole. Mm-hmm. And it was because part of the definition, part of their character was defined about the groups they're in. That's not any different than it is today, but it goes back to what we were talking about half an hour ago. The speed of information, the speed in which an AI is trying to move you in one direction or another. What was it the other day? What's his name that owns Facebook?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg was on Rogan. He was talking about how he didn't want to build something that was negative. So he doesn't promote content that has the mean face emoji or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. He's full of shit.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say. But isn't that what we're talking about here? Because what he basically did is say, hey, here's a statement of information that somebody's putting out, and people are liking it or not liking it, and they have an option to have an emoji on there of negative or positive. Well, if you don't like the emoji, why would you put a negative emoji on there for somebody to utilize if you're then going to use that as part of the criteria not to put that up on a higher ranking?
See,
there's a reason for it.
I think he's letting the cat out of the bag a little bit there.
Exactly.
Because he said he latched onto something as pointless as an emoji for a negative atmosphere without acknowledging that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all these organizations owned by these huge, almost pseudo crony capitalist organizations that are basically monopolies. Every single one of them has, in my opinion, really huge net negative on society, like a big one, to the point where no one really wants to talk about it, because then we actually have to reevaluate how we operate with each other. Because again, we talk about that lack of community. Well, the lack of community is something that we all agreed to do. That's what it was. We all decided to turn on a phone. We all decided to pretend that thing was a tool, that was effective in a positive way, without actually thinking about how it could have a negative effect. We all were blinded by the beauty of what could have been. And that's why we have the problem we have today. We have data mining. We have issues of invasions of privacy. We have, to a level that has not been to before in human history, the ability for someone to not only predict, but to manipulate how you choose to operate online. It's not about predicting anymore. It's about manipulation. We can talk about the dancing girls or whatever, but that's not even the problem. The problem is the fact that whenever I look at a website and I click on an ad, that company tracks me wherever I go. That company knows exactly what I'm doing. The company knows my entire search history. That company can look into all my data and information and mine it without any repercussions. That's the negative part here. Yet Mark Zuckerberg's worried about emoji. We're worried about how we feel in relation to a picture that, by the way, Instagram no longer gives shit about.
People are giving up their privacy intentionally.
Yeah, it's all an agreed to
they
thing.
believe there's something they're gaining from the ability of those AIs to look at them and track them, and because now somebody's going to send a little option for a shoe or this or that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
I don't think so.
Because instead of you having to search for the newest Nike shoe or whatever the case may be, it's going to come to you. I'm just saying that's
from the perspective of us. We know how that works.
But see, the analogy I want to get back to for a second, we were talking about Zuckerberg and Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And think about this. Okay, suddenly today, and luckily we're still online, so you guys can see us and hear us. But suddenly there is no internet, okay? And you move into a city, a small city, a few thousand people. Let's say it's 10,000 people, okay? You are part of that city, whatever the name of that city is, anywhere USA. And so there's a collective understanding that everybody is part of anywhere USA. Houses, apartments, whatever, and there's a government for that city. And the government leans one way or not one way. And some people have library cards because they want to be in a group of people that read. And some people go to the Moose Lodge because that's what they want to do. And some people then join a bowling league because that's what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And some people go to the PTA because that's what they want to do because they have kids. And so what happens over time is these cities of 10,000 people end up being a collection of smaller groups. This is not any different than what's happening now. The speed in which it's happening is the difference.
I don't know. I think that's true, but I think it's partially true. I think that there is a difference between what's happening now and that, because you gave every example there of I went to go do something. I went to go and engage with something. People
recruit
people
but
there's a difference though, because if I leave my home and I go and talk with people face to face, as an interaction, someone knows me, they can recognize me, I have the interaction, I can build that community by developing a presence within that community. Right now, we have a group of individuals that develop nothing. You're developing something in a world that does not exist.
That's if you believe that you're not living in
without electricity. Does it exist? Without, I mean, but that's what I'm talking about.
It's true with any of these things we're talking about.
We're not with regular community. We existed prior to that.
Well, I know, but the groups didn't.
Of course they did.
No, when there was no electricity, there was no bowling.
Yeah, but there was a hunting group. There was a cultural
the groups
group.
changed. So what this is a change of a type of group.
But it's also a change of interactions in groups. Because if I sit down with you and we have a conversation over a drink or have a conversation over a fire with dinner or all that jazz, that is 100% different in almost every single way than it is with people who are just going online, shouting out their opinion, and then having people go thumbs up, like, or slick comment response. All that is totally different. It's not a real communication. It's you saying something smart, someone responding, and then you saying, wow, look at the smart thing I said. Which everyone engages in that. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not criticizing that's the point. I'm just saying that's not an accurate representation of actual community. It's not. That's why people are so desperate to be heard. That's literally what it is.
I just think it's an accurate representation of a different type of community.
Yeah, but that different type of community can be bad.
I don't disagree with that.
Any type of community can be bad.
I'm not saying
physical, normal communities can be terrible. I mean, don't you think this is just an evolution?
Mm-mm.
You don't think so?
No, I don't.
You don't think that social media is just an evolving way of communication?
I think it's an artificial implementation is what I think.
Well,
I
yeah,
think it
it's
is.
not like it's not like it fell out of the sky. It's something we created.
And I think communication has to be reciprocated. In a lot of instances, this one thing that we're doing, people are watching, they're developing immunity from that, and we can see certain ways and be interacting and see facial expressions and all that. That's fine and all dandy. There's positives and negatives there. At the end of the day, though, us going out and talking to people who listen to our show, or us going out and interacting with other podcasters, has a net positive, in my opinion, higher than any of this ever will. That's my opinion. And I will be that. I'll have that opinion till I die, until we maybe develop the AI to which we all become Bruce Willis from that one movie that we watched. What was that movie?
Yeah, I remember the movie.
God, what was that movie?
I want to say Avatar. But it was like he had an avatar that would go out and do things.
I think the funniest thing about it the funniest thing just on that movie note, the funniest thing that I remember from that movie is like he was all like super serious and super like badass in the simulation, and then he came out of it. He looked like absolute shit.
He was just he was trashed. He was older, and he was But I mean, it's also maybe that movie was a decent representation of what we're looking for. That's like Ready Player One to a different level, right? But I surrogates.
Yeah,
I think you're wrong. Okay, not that I never think you're wrong. I kind of think you're wrong a lot, and
Thanks.
I'm glad you think I'm wrong a lot.
I don't think you're wrong a lot.
And that's by the way, everybody, that's why this stuff works, because people can think they're wrong and still have a conversation. But I do think this is just an evolution of tools. I really do. I mean, right now we're sitting in the studio. We've got microphones everywhere.
You said tools.
I always go back to that.
Tools is different.
It is a tool.
We talked about evolution of humanity. Evolution of tools is different.
But okay.
I'm making a deviation here.
I'm sure it's a deviation, and I know you're going to talk about deviation, but my point is that everything's a freaking tool. I mean, society was different before somebody actually said, hey, that lightning started a fire over there. Why don't we keep that fire going and cook this mammoth over here? And ooh, that smells good. Anybody want some seasoning salt on that thing? That, and then, hey, how about instead of using this weird rock, why don't we try to chip it into a round circle so that we can use it as a wheel? Mm-hmm. Everything's a tool. Everything changes society. Everything we do outside of our own identity. That's a bad word to use today. Our self, our animal nature. Everything outside of that is how do we use it?
Yeah.
That's all it is. And this is just another one of those all it is things. The problem with it is that it's going so fast that we as human beings can't keep up with it. So we're going off in these wild swinging directions, moving Overton windows and changing all over the place, flip-flopping, and we're making life worse because.
But I don't think that that's purely because we can't keep up with it. I think it's because the people who created the tool can't control how you use the tool. That's why they have shadow banning. That's why they have.
It's always been the case.
No, it hasn't.
Sure,
if I handed you a hatchet, and if I was an honest individual, I'd make a hatchet that would work for you. I can't force you to use the hatchet I want you to.
Yeah.
Unless
the first person that made a hatchet had one hatchet.
But then
nobody else had a hatchet.
Yeah, but no.
And if nobody else knew how to make a hatchet,
you're attacking.
Guess what?
You're attacking a part that I'm not making. You're attacking a part of my argument that I'm not making.
He controlled the tool.
Yeah, but if I give you a hatchet.
Why would you give me one unless you kept one?
Okay, now we're going down a different path.
No, you're not.
Yeah, we are because I'm talking from the production standpoint. Never mind if I'm a douchebag or not. I'm an honest individual who makes hatchets. You come and buy a hatchet from me. I give you a hatchet. I can't then just follow you to your house and force you to use the hatchet in the way that I want you to.
No, what you do though is when you sold me that hatchet, you say, "Hey, by the way, I've got 4 other uses for this hatchet that nobody else knows about."
Yeah, but that wouldn't mean. Yeah, but that does not mean that you only use them that way.
No, but you've centered that person.
Yeah, but that's a soft influence. Hard influence. No, it's not. It's not the same.
Okay,
hard influence.
Every time you sold the hatchet, you told everybody there's only one use for that hatchet,
and then people go and do what they want with it. I can't do that on this. I can't.
Sure you can.
No,
if you want to become a hacker, you can.
That's a whole nother conversation.
That's my point. It's all in how you manipulate the tool.
I'm telling you, it's not. I know for a point that it is. Like, there's an extent to your argument that I agree with. Then there's a point where it isn't. Like, I don't agree with it. There's a point where, okay, I say one thing and I'm gone off the internet. I have no access to anything. I have no access to defend myself. Only the media and social media and the people who control it and the powers that be get to just bind my image for who I am. There's a point where you do not have control. And that thing, the line is very thin.
It's because you don't own the hatchet.
Okay, but again,
borrowing it.
The hatchet maker, normally when you bought it, would give you the hatchet.
Hey, by the way, here's the hatchet. I made it for you. Do whatever you want with it. And then a week later, give me the hatchet back, and you're going to jail because you killed somebody with that hatchet.
Okay,
you used it incorrectly. You used it for a usage that it was never designed for.
Yeah,
look at Alfred Nobel.
Yeah, but that's
the Nobel
still not,
Prize. What did he make originally? Does anybody know out there?
I don't think that's the same.
Why not?
Because you're talking about extremes. We're utilizing the very extreme usage of a hatchet. I'm talking about the daily
That's what you do when you make
usage.
examples. You use extremes to make a converse opinion.
So the basic example of social media is, you time in to say to communicate, right? Because that's the idea, right? We all communicate on social media. That's the idea, is to bring people together and to develop a group. Not to deviate, but to communicate and to develop a group. But there are rules that you don't know and I don't know that are completely and totally opaque to the user, but not to the creator. The creator knows the rules, but you don't know the rules. If I buy a hatchet from you, you know what rule I know? Don't kill people with a hatchet, because I'm a normal person and I haven't fallen on my head 4 times. So here's the thing. That's why it's different. It is 100% different.
It's not. Come on. If you're going to make an argument, you got to come up with something to make it. Okay. If you want to talk about the internet or hatchets or anything else in a more accurate way, say, okay, there's rules for this hatchet. When you bought this hatchet for me, I gave you a receipt. There was some really small letters that I engraved in the bottom of that hatchet.
Don't kill someone.
Okay, yeah. Don't kill somebody, but also don't threaten anybody with it.
But those things,
don't threaten anybody.
I understand.
With it.
Yeah.
Don't hold it up in front of anybody, because somebody may think you're going to use it against them. And if we have witnesses that say you were going to threaten somebody with that hatchet, we're going to take that hatchet away from you. And you're like, I didn't threaten anybody with it. So then I was just showing him my hatchet.
So now you're proving my point. All of a sudden, you're an authoritarian. All of a sudden, you're in an authoritarian.
Rule.
All of a sudden, you're in an authoritarian situation.
And now you know the rule.
So that's my whole point. Is it's not that the hatchet. I get your point when it comes to the rules. I totally agree with you in that area. What I don't agree with, though, is this belief that everything from the point of creation was created in such a way that it's the tool that it was created to be. There's not some other purpose. Okay. That I think there was an other purpose created very early on.
Okay, let me ask you one other question. Try to. I know you don't like my hatchet.
Hey, we got to change the.
Let's bury the hatchet.
We could talk. Good one. That, you know what? That was a good one. You get a little applause. We're going to go ahead and do that. Just there you go. Wow. Bury the hatchet. That was good. That was very, very good. That was great. Hold it. Well, yeah. Let's make the people listening go deaf.
So when cell phones came out, okay,
we could just use the BMW example that just happened.
I don't remember that, but no. Let me. You can use that in a second. But when cell phones came out, everybody was like enamored with them. I mean, I had one that I could feel the heat on the other side of my head when I used it.
Uranium, yeah.
So I'm probably going to pay for that later.
Yeah, probably.
But the point is everybody drove around with the damn things up to their head all the time. Dialing them, riding with my knee. There's a story that Bayo could tell you about me, like writing something on a pad of paper, driving with my knee and having a phone like this. And she told on me, by the way.
I did.
Even though I bought her ice cream.
He said that if I didn't tell on him to Mother Bull, he would get me. Right. He would get me Dairy Queen Blizzard.
And you still told him. That's why I would never include
after
you.
I got the Blizzard, so I ensured I got the bag first.
She ate every bit of that Blizzard and then told on me anyway.
I would never include you in a robbery.
It was for his own good. He shouldn't be driving while looking at a piece of paper.
This is the point I'm making. There was no law against it.
It's the same.
There was no understanding of the need to have any kind of rules engaged in that, because it was new. It was a new tool. It was developing. It was evolving.
Okay.
This is my point with all this. So there are a ton of things I hate about what we're look. The argument is really not that it's changing. The argument is not that there are rules or no rules. The argument is the rule right? Is it okay to show you my hatchet?
No, the argument,
and have you understand I'm not being dangerous.
Right. The argument is the rule. Does the rule make sense? because I think right is
that's even better. I use the term right, but that's the wrong.
Because if you get in a
right
car,
is the wrong.
If you get in a car with your phone
Right
up
is
to
wrong
your
and
ear,
wrong is right.
if you get in a car and your phone up to your ear and you crash and you kill somebody, that law makes sense. We shouldn't have that happen. If you get
Why is it the phone's fault?
If you're not paying attention, is the user's fault. It's whether the user
that's
goes
what they
to jail.
said about radios when they first came out.
Okay,
you know that?
So with that,
that's what they said about cars when they replaced horses.
So with that being said, whether that's the case or not, my point being is if I'm sitting driving with in a car with a phone up to my ear, I'm distracted. There's a reasonable law to that. If I log into my Facebook or my Instagram or my YouTube and I post something that isn't liked by a majority of people who control the platforms, not what isn't liked by people who are on the platforms, what isn't liked by people who control the platforms, I get no traction. I get no audience. I get no people listening because they deem that idea a bad idea. That is totally different. Yes. 100%.
You got that the wrong
I don't.
way. Yes, you do. Because you just said if you don't get enough likes and everything, you don't get any traction.
No. They don't let you get any traction.
That's the
point I'm making.
And again, that is preferential treatment, right? So they like something that they know is going to make them money. That's what they do.
Well, I don't think that matters. I don't think it's about money. I don't think it's about money. I've come to this conclusion, Bull, that I don't think that it's about money. I think it's about power and control. Because there's plenty of companies that would. There's plenty of companies that would support anybody who has an opinion that they align with. Now it's a matter of, well, if I support that opinion, then I'm going to be canceled. And AWS is going to remove my ability to have a website. The banks are not going to let me invest. The government's going to tax me higher. That's when it's different between the argument of the hatchet that we're talking about and the argument of social media. Because now it's the controlling of thought. It's the controlling of opinion. It's the controlling of statement. That is different. Totally different game there.
It's just a different power game. I said money, but the money is inconsequential without the power that it gives you. Money is paper. It's value that we're talking about, power that we're talking about, and they all line up in the same direction. And I know they're different than a hatchet.
I know.
I get that.
I know.
But I'm just saying that the evolution of our civilization goes from a simple engineered feats, simple tools being created to very, very complex ones. That's what happens to human beings.
Yeah.
And those complex ones means there's additional challenges that never anybody ever thought of.
Well, if you're an honest individual like all of us here, then you'd create something and let it be open source. You create something and let it be free market. You create something and let it be, kind of. You create something and have it, like you said, decentralized finance. That's what an honest society would do, and that's what honest people in power would do. And this goes to our point on normalization of deviance. Originally coined and used by American sociologist Diane Vaughan, normalization of deviance describes the process in which deviance from correct and proper behavior or rule becomes normalized in government or corporate culture. A process where a clearly unsafe practice, or in my opinion, a clearly immoral practice, to be considered normal if it does not immediately cause catastrophe. A long incubation period before a final disaster with early warning signs that were either misinterpreted, ignored, or missed completely. Ironically, this was used to describe the public's deviance from health measures during the early 2020s, health measures that later came out to be completely ineffective. So which party is engaging in the deviance? Is it us, or is it the people who created the rules, or is it both? Tornado of deviance, maybe? Is that what should be changed to?
The hurricane.
The hurricane of deviance.
Sounds like a starring Russell Crowe.
I like that.
Hurricane of deviance.
You know who can probably correct that hurricane for us?
God.
Bill Gates.
Oh, God.
He's got a patent just to do that.
It's going to be real good, guys. Trust me.
What's the old saying? The only thing that stays the same is change, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? This is the normalization of things that were not normal. This is moving that window to a place that was not collectively acceptable before, to force it to be collectively acceptable.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
And I think that's where I get all riled up per a few minutes ago about social media, because I see that because Beowulf, you and I were in a time when almost anything kind of went
I mean, yeah.
Almost anything went when it came to social media. Not anything, but almost anything. And then it came to this point where people were like, well, maybe we should have some rules, to the point where it was an overcorrection.
I mean, you guys remember Napster, right? LimeWire.
I think it was
Criminals.
2015, 16 was when things really started to change on social media, I think.
What happened then?
Well, there's the glaringly obvious correlation there, which may not be causation, but Donald Trump was elected in 2016, much to the anger and upset of very many people on social media at the time.
Do you think it was him or was it Shit Pie?
Well, I think Shit Pie and the communications.
He's thinking of Asia.
Yeah, I call him Shit Pie.
Yeah, but that's not his actual name.
Well, yeah, I refer to him as a shithead. The FCC thing with
Asia Pie. Yeah,
what was section 230? Section 230.
Well, he served as U.S. federal communications.
Well, we don't need to go into him. He's a douchebag, and I don't want to talk about him. But my point, he's a douchebag. I don't want him mentioned anymore. Like, he's terrible. I don't like him in this home. I don't want his face anywhere near us because he's an evil individual. And the reason I say that,
the wolf, I think he needs a rabbit.
Look,
I think he does.
My biggest part about all this is that, because you brought that up, I think that ties into it. I do, because there was a point in time where there was somewhat of a collective agreement, and I'll let you get to it in a second. Somewhat of a collective agreement in which we all said, you know what, the internet is good. The internet is for everybody. The internet should have an area. Social media should have an area for anyone's opinion to a certain extent. And now that's no longer the case. If you're not in the group, then you're not allowed to say what you want to say. And that's plain and simple. And it won't change because these groups, these companies, these massive organizations, one that Ajit Pai is a part of, control the levers of the technology and of the platform.
I mean, perhaps. I thought you didn't want to talk about him, so I'm just not going to. I'm not going to go over it anymore. All right.
Hey, we can talk about anything here. There is no censorship.
Can we?
On
I mean,
this
we mentioned Donald Trump. We're already blacklisted.
All I'm saying is, yes, there was different things on social media at the time. There was an era where, just like any industry, there is a period of time before regulation sets in. And that's with anything, right? It's the get in first while you can type mentality.
What's going on right now with
Think about some of the biggest social media people, like on Instagram. They're all moving to TikTok. They're all moving because it's like there's always something else to move to because things get stale. And social media in its largest form, think of the type of content we consume now, which is mostly video type content in a scenario where you can keep watching it forever and it never runs out, based on an AI platform or algorithm where you're just fed as much information and noise and visuals that appeal to you as much as possible. And every once in a while you get something you don't like I said earlier, and you're fed that need for validation. I want to get something I like, as opposed to back in 2012, 2013 was the one of the coming ups of Instagram. It was just photos with filters on them. We've evolved a lot in just the past 10 years, I think, on social media.
It's changing dramatically, and you can look in all kinds of places to see it. I mean, I remember a time when you were much younger, Beo, that every weekend, maybe even during the week, we'd go see a movie. Mm-hmm. And, that changed a lot.
I was poor. I was not a part of that. I lived in
a
hovel, a box when I was younger. TV was...
But now, I think about that because I really enjoy the big screen. I think it's a nice break to go do something like that. And I know everything is tainted by the couple of years of shutdowns and everything else. But the fact is that a lot of the content that's out today is much better in an 8-episode basically, those are movies.
Well, that's what they've been able to do.
Well-entrenched movies.
They've been able to create movies.
It's something that's adapting.
And you get invested. You watch a season of something comes out. Stranger Things, for example.
How many times did you see a Coca-Cola can in Stranger Things?
God.
All over the place.
The entire show was a
So
Coca-Cola
they keep
can.
you hooked. They get you invested in the characters. Mm-hmm. And they let you binge 12 hours of it within a couple of days. or
So-
8 hours of it, and then they leave you hanging for a year and a half.
Yeah, so
it's
your
better than the
existence-
movie keeping you hanging for a year and a half in a series.
Well, your existence is then, again, like with social media, is entirely determined on that algorithmic addiction that you brought up earlier. It's all corporatized in the sense of, okay, well, I get to watch a show 8 episodes long, each with hour and a half. So it's over 10 hours of my time. I can't snap. Over 10 hours of my time gone, just completely gone. And there's nothing wrong with that. You want to do that with your time, that's fine. But you know what you're not doing in that instance? You're not paying attention to other things. You're not engaging in anything outside of that. You are just in a world that doesn't really exist, that's been created by someone else, that you are then tied into, or you're scrolling endlessly. All you're doing is just spending your time scrolling endlessly.
Or that you figured out, because of all the other stressors in your life, you're doing some kind of version of escapism. And that's truly the case for people like me.
Well, let's segue into the final thing before we wrap up. I do think we should talk about a poetic form of confessional prose by German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. Martin made confession. He lived from 1892 to 1984. Martin made confession in his speech for the Confessing Church in Frankfurt on January 6, 1946. His poem is about the silence of German intellectuals and certain clergy, including himself, following the Nazis' rise to power and subsequent incremental purging of chosen targets in many groups. There are many versions of this, one specifically by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, established by the British government, but we'll stick with the shorter version, which I need to adjust because it is technically incorrect. And I quote, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me."
Very, very important statement.
Powerful. And I mean, this is also the type of thing that people use on both sides of the spectrum. The type of thing. This is the mentality.
Type of thinking. And I think that ties into that gradualism nature of things, because it starts out as innocent. It starts out as something that is innocuous, something that is just not noticeable if it's done, in a way that is holistic. Or it's a Big Bang situation in which, in a span of a few years, something changes so drastically that you feel like you're in a totally different world. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. I mean,
that was very cute.
Thanks. That's what it comes down to. And I think there's a few things that we can do to combat it, and I think that we should chat about that briefly in the conclusion. Obviously, we've discussed the boiling frog, we've discussed Lingqi, we've discussed the normalization of deviance, creeping normality, and that poem by Martin Niemöller. It might seem distressing, but I think there is some good news. Frogs don't sit mindlessly, even in the water, if it is wonderfully warm. They, soon to be boiling soup, they actually jump out. But thankfully, the same applies to humans. There comes a breaking point where we realize the narrative on any side is completely fabricated, and we can, at any point, choose to push back against it. Creeping normality and normalization of deviance aren't always net negatives, so there should be some thoughtful analysis before jumping into the deep end of fighting back. Because creeping normality is gradual, you'll most likely notice it after damage has begun to occur. The best way to combat this tactic, for it is a psychological tactic, is to evaluate the party pushing the agenda. Is it a little too much? Is a little too much being asked of you? Are certain habitual activities coming to light as time goes on? Do intentions seem deceitful or honest? Asking these questions can help in determining if a party, group, politician, or even a friend is engaging in a soft or intentional form of creeping normality. The best way to fight back is to expose the problems and address them head on. If someone or something is inflicting damage upon you, take control of the situation by establishing a boundary that you've identified the problem and that you're intent on preventing it in the future. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, and unfortunately that holds true especially today. Self-examination of your own behavior is an absolute necessity and is likely a major reason why creeping normality is such a problem in society. We suffer right now from complacency. And I think the best way to really work on these things is to talk about them and to understand where they come from and how to best address them. Because if, Neil Moller's poem goes, if no one says anything, if no one stands up to anything, if no one notices something and just goes along with the tool or the crowd, then it will inevitably end up where inevitably end up where the train is going.
What's the saying? If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an interesting topic today.
I think a very good one, and one that we could develop in a lot of different directions. I think that it's plainly obvious to people like ourselves that sit around and talk about these subjects of some of these things that's happening. Now, we may have our own set of biases because we're human beings, and most human beings do, and we have our view of where the Overton window should be and should not be. But we're also open to the idea of it shifting in different ways, or gradually expanding or contracting when necessary. The problem is that there is always, it seems like, at the end of these conversations, or behind the narratives that we hear, a small but very focused group of individuals or companies or governments that want to keep or expand the power base that they have. To Wolf's point, though, human beings are never as stupid as people think they are. They just aren't. People are way more intelligent than people think they are. They see things, they understand them, they feel them. You can go in a million different ways, including metaphysical, as to why they do and why they do not, for a different podcast someday. Like, go back to the DMP type of stuff we talked about before. But the fact is they're not stupid. They see this stuff coming, and hopefully they understand before there's no other voice left to help them that they need to help themselves.
Yeah. Anything to add, Bale?
I mean, that was a great cherry on top. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our episode. We hope that this episode has given you some food for thought when it comes to creeping normality and how that applies to your life, whether on social media or personally. Definitely think it's something to be observational of, especially for a healthy psychological existence. This obviously, as we've said in the little disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, for our listeners, I don't believe, there is no one for the YouTube. This is opinion. It's not meant to be like advice in relation to like anything psychological or in relation to therapy. You need to go see someone if you feel like there's something that you need help with. I would recommend you go and do that. But this is merely just information to jog your brain a bit. Just think about some things that normally people don't think about. But yeah, I hope, we hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again for tuning into another episode of The Wolf and Bull.
If you'd like to subscribe, you should here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, subscribe. We're going to have
click on that bull's face.
Bull's face. Yeah,
that's what you need. I'm not bull's face. Wolf's face. Don't put my face up.
We'll have a little button at the very end.
Actually, you should put up Bale's face.
We could.
Yeah.
This is all in post that has to be done next week because I'm pushing this out in a day.
Okay. Why don't you restart that little segment right there?
But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We can't wait to see you next week. Thanks, guys.